Yeonpyeong Island, the island where the bombardment never ended. Far out in the cold waters of the Yellow Sea lies a small South Korean island called Yeonpyeongdo, or Yeonpyeong Island. From a distance, it can look peaceful, almost beautiful. Fishing boats move slowly across the water, seabirds circle above the coastline, and small houses sit along narrow roads between military installations and fields. But Yeonpyeong is not an ordinary island. It lies close to North Korea and near the northern limit line, a disputed maritime boundary that has remained one of the most dangerous areas on the Korean peninsula. For the people who live there, the sea is not simply a source of food or a beautiful horizon. Beyond that water lies a heavily militarized border, and the possibility of sudden violence has been part of island life for generations. For many years, the people of Yeonpyeong learned to live with military exercises, warning sirens, soldiers, artillery positions, and the distant sounds of weapons. They became accustomed to the idea that danger could come from across the water without warning. Yet even people who live with danger every day can become comfortable with it. That was what happened on November 23, 2010. The morning had passed normally, and by early afternoon the island seemed like any other day. Fishermen worked, residents moved around the village, workers were busy with construction, and soldiers remained at their positions. Nobody looking at the peaceful island that afternoon could have imagined that within minutes, Yeonpyeong would become the center of an international military crisis. At approximately 2:34 p.m., the first artillery shells began falling on Yeonpyeong Island. North Korea fired approximately 170 artillery rounds toward the island and surrounding waters. Many of the shells struck the island itself. The first explosions shattered the illusion of safety almost instantly. Houses shook violently, windows broke, fires began spreading, and thick smoke rose above the village. People who had been walking through the streets suddenly ran for cover. Parents searched for children. Workers abandoned their positions. Soldiers rushed toward defensive positions. Residents who had lived with military tension for years suddenly realized that the danger they had always feared had become real. The explosions continued, and the island became almost impossible to recognize. Smoke covered the streets while fires burned in residential areas and forests. The sound of artillery echoed across the water and through the buildings. People desperately tried to reach underground shelters. Some residents ran while carrying children. Others searched for elderly family members. Some did not even know where the next shell would land. There was no safe direction to run because the explosions were happening around the island. The shelters that had seemed unnecessary during ordinary days suddenly became the only places where people believed they could survive. Inside those shelters, the world became terrifyingly small. People were packed together underground, listening to the explosions above them. Every impact caused the walls to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling. Children cried while adults tried to keep them calm. Some people attempted to call relatives, but the bombardment disrupted electricity and communications. The people hiding underground could not see what was happening outside. They could only listen. An explosion would come, then another, followed by several seconds of silence. During those seconds, everyone waited for the next sound. Boom. Silence. Boom. Silence. Then another explosion would shake the earth, reminding everyone that the attack was continuing. For the people inside those shelters, time must have felt almost meaningless. 5 minutes could feel like an hour. Every sound could have meant that another building had been destroyed. Every silence could have meant that the next shell was already traveling through the sky. Some people did not know whether their homes were still standing. Others did not know whether their relatives were alive. The fear was not only the fear of death. It was the fear of uncertainty. Outside, soldiers were fighting back. South Korean forces returned fire toward North Korean artillery positions, while military commanders attempted to determine the scale of the attack. Smoke and flames continued to rise over the island. Eventually, the immediate bombardment ended, but the damage had already been done. 4 South Koreans were killed during the attack, 2 Marines and 2 civilian workers, and many others were wounded. Homes and other buildings were damaged or destroyed, and large areas of vegetation caught fire. Approximately 1,700 residents were eventually evacuated from the island. But this is where the history of Yeonpyeong becomes intertwined with its legends. After the bombardment, some residents found it difficult to return to ordinary life. They had survived, but survival did not mean that the fear disappeared. A person could leave the island physically and still carry the island inside their memories. For some survivors, loud noises could bring back memories of the attack. A distant explosion, a sudden vibration, or even the sound of thunder could become a reminder of that terrible afternoon. The shelters that had saved lives could also become reminders of the moment when people believed they might never see daylight again. Over time, stories began to circulate about strange sounds heard around the island at night. There is no reliable evidence that these stories describe genuine supernatural events, but they became part of the kind of folklore that naturally grows around places marked by tragedy. According to one fictionalized legend, people occasionally hear artillery explosions late at night when no military exercises are taking place. The first sound is distant. The second seems closer. But the third is said to come from somewhere inside the island itself. The legend says that if you hear 3 explosions after midnight, you should not go outside. The first explosion is the memory of the living. The second belongs to the dead. But the third, according to the story, means that something has returned. One winter night, a young soldier named Jun-ho was assigned to patrol one of the quieter sections of Yeonpyeong. Jun-ho had heard stories about the island, but he considered them nothing more than superstition. He believed in things he could see and measure. He believed in military equipment, surveillance systems, radio communications, and artillery. Ghosts did not concern him. The real danger, he believed, came from people with weapons. The night was unusually quiet. The sea was almost completely black, and there was very little wind. Jun-ho walked along the patrol route with his flashlight in one hand and his radio attached to his uniform. Every few minutes he checked the surrounding area. Nothing appeared unusual. The island seemed asleep. Then his radio made a clicking sound. Jun-ho stopped walking. He waited for a transmission. Nothing came. He checked the radio again and tried contacting the control room. "Control, this is Patrol 2. Do you copy?" Only static answered. He tried again. "Control, Patrol 2. Radio check." Nothing. Then he heard a sound from somewhere beyond the buildings. Boom. Jun-ho immediately turned toward the sea. There had been no flash. No warning. No aircraft. No visible explosion. He raised his radio. "Control, did you hear that?" There was no response. Then it happened again. Boom. The second explosion sounded closer. Jun-ho's heartbeat increased. He scanned the darkness with his flashlight, but the road remained empty. Then came the third sound. Boom. This time, he felt the ground tremble beneath his boots. His flashlight moved across the road. And that was when he saw the old man. The man stood several meters away, completely motionless. He looked like a fisherman. His clothes were old and covered with dirt. He held what appeared to be part of a fishing net in one hand. Jun-ho immediately assumed the man was a civilian who had somehow entered a restricted area. "Sir!" Jun-ho shouted. "Stop!" The old man did not move. Jun-ho approached carefully. "Sir, this area is restricted. You need to come with me." The man slowly turned his head. His face was pale. His eyes looked exhausted. He stared at Jun-ho for several seconds before asking quietly, "Has the shelling stopped?" Jun-ho was confused. "What?" "The shelling," the man repeated. "Has it stopped?" Jun-ho looked toward the sea. Yes. It's over. The old man's expression changed. No, he whispered. Jun-ho frowned. What do you mean? The old man pointed toward the darkness. They're still firing. Jun-ho turned. There was nothing there. When he turned back, the fisherman had disappeared. The road was empty. Jun-ho searched the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the man. Then his flashlight illuminated something on the ground. A fishing net. It was wet. It smelled strongly of seawater. Jun-ho had no explanation for how it had appeared there. The following morning, he told another soldier about the encounter. Instead of laughing, the older soldier became unusually serious. He asked Jun-ho exactly what the old man had said. When Jun-ho repeated the question, the older soldier remained silent for several seconds. Then he said, "Don't answer that question if you hear it again." Jun-ho asked him why. The older soldier simply replied, "Because some people on this island are still waiting for the shelling to stop." Jun-ho never forgot those words. He later researched the 2010 attack in greater detail and discovered how much destruction had occurred that afternoon. The bombardment came in separate periods. The initial firing began around 2:34 p.m., followed by another period later in the afternoon. The final firing eventually ended around 4:42 p.m. For the people trapped underground, those hours must have felt endless. But there was something even more disturbing. The island had changed permanently. The people returned. The houses were rebuilt. The roads were repaired. Military defenses were strengthened. Yet the memories remained. And according to another local ghost story, the island remembers the bombardment every year. The story says that on the night before November 23rd, the sea becomes strangely quiet. The fishing boats disappear into the darkness, and the island seems to become colder than usual. Around midnight, people sometimes claim that they hear distant explosions. Boom. Then silence. Boom. Then silence. And finally, boom. After the third explosion, the legend says that the dead begin walking. They do not attack anyone. They do not scream. They simply walk. Soldiers walk along roads where soldiers once ran during the bombardment. Fishermen appear near the shoreline. Civilians stand outside buildings that were destroyed decades earlier. Children appear near shelters, waiting for someone to tell them that it is finally safe to leave. One fictional account tells of a soldier who encountered a little girl near an old shelter late at night. She appeared to be wearing a school uniform. Her clothes were covered in dust, and her hair looked wet from seawater. The soldier asked her where her parents were. She pointed toward the shelter. "They're inside," she said. The soldier asked, "Why aren't you inside with them?" The girl looked at him. Then she asked a question that terrified him. "Did the shooting stop?" The soldier answered yes. The girl smiled. Then she said, "That's what they told us last time." The flashlight went dark. For several seconds, the soldier stood in complete darkness. Then he heard voices. Dozens of them. Adults. Children. Soldiers. Fishermen. People calling names. People asking where their families were. People asking whether it was safe to come outside. Then came the sound of artillery. The soldier fell to the ground. But when his flashlight came back on, there was no attack. There was no fire. There were no people. Only the empty road. And beside the shelter was a single child's shoe. That story is fictionalized folklore, not a documented supernatural event. But its horror comes from the fact that every element of it is connected to something real: the shelters, the civilians, the soldiers, the bombardment, the fires, the deaths, and the fear experienced by the people of Yeonpyeong. That is what makes this island different from an ordinary haunted location. The ghosts do not need to be real for the story to be frightening. The history is already frightening. The real people who died did not disappear from history. Their names remain connected to the events of November 23, 2010. The survivors continued living with the memory of the attack. Some residents were reluctant to return because they feared another bombardment. The island received additional military defenses and new shelters because the people living there understood that the danger had not simply vanished. And perhaps that is the true ghost of Yeonpyeong. Fear. Fear that never completely leaves. Imagine living on the island years after the bombardment. You are sitting inside your house late at night. The television is playing quietly. The refrigerator hums in the kitchen. Outside, the sea is dark. Then you hear thunder. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your heart starts beating faster. You stop breathing for a moment. You wait. Was that thunder? Or artillery? You hear another sound. Boom. For a few seconds, you are back in 2010. You are underground. The walls are shaking. People are crying. You don't know whether your home still exists. You don't know whether your family is safe. You don't know whether the next shell will hit the shelter. Then you realize that it was only thunder. But your body doesn't know the difference. That is how trauma can haunt a place. Not with transparent figures. Not with glowing eyes. Not with monsters. But with memories that return whenever the world produces the right sound. And perhaps this is why the legend of Yeonpyeong continues to feel so believable. Because the island truly was haunted. Not necessarily by spirits. But by history. The sea still surrounds it. The military installations still watch the horizon. The shelters still exist. The memorials still carry the names of those who died. The scars of the bombardment became part of the island's landscape. And every November, people remember. The island's most frightening ghost story therefore ends not with a monster, but with a question. Late at night, when the island is silent, imagine standing alone beside the sea. The water moves gently against the shore. There are no voices. No cars. No people. Only darkness stretching toward the horizon. Then you hear it. Boom. You wait. Boom. Your heart begins beating faster. Then. Boom. You turn toward the darkness. There is nobody there. But behind you, someone whispers. Is it over? You slowly turn around. The road is empty. The whisper comes again. Is it over? You want to answer. You want to say yes. You want to tell whoever is standing in the darkness that the war is finished, the shelling has stopped, and they can finally go home. But then you remember something. The northern limit line is still there. The military installations are still there. The shelters are still there. The island is still close to the border. And the memory of November 23, 2010, is still alive. So you remain silent. Because perhaps the question was never meant for you. Perhaps the voice was speaking to the dead. Perhaps it was speaking to the survivors. Or perhaps it was coming from the island itself. And somewhere beyond the darkness, across the cold waters of the Yellow Sea, another faint sound begins. Not thunder. Not wind. Not waves. An explosion. Then another. Then another. And for one terrible moment, Yeonpyeong Island sounds exactly as it did that afternoon in 2010. Boom. 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 The bombardment is over. But according to the legend, the island never heard the final shell.